question this morning. What system, what religion are we constantly being told that is causing such havoc and bloodshed and terror and wickedness in this world? Who is it? Islam. Islam. Now, I got another question. Which book in the Bible is the one that talks about the final things in Earth's history? Which book of the Bible? The book of Revelation. Daniel does some, and Revelation, of course, finishes it off. Now, if you go to those two prophetic books, and which one of Ellen White's books talks mostly about end-time events? Which one in the Conflict of the Ages series? Which book? Great Controversy. Now, how big is the Great Controversy? How many pages? Close to 700? 650, 700 pages. Now, I have a question. Why is it that in that nearly 700-page book, that in the last 350 pages, which look specifically at end-time events, why didn't that book ever mention Islam? Why? Is it because God just said, no, Ellen, there's certain things that are going to happen in this world, and you're just not going to be revealing those to your people? Is that what happened? Propaganda, a smoke screen. Folk, to lead us in the wrong direction. You know, I think about the statements that Jesus made in Matthew 24 that we've gone over many, many times. 4 times to those people living around the destruction of Jerusalem and on the brink of eternity, Jesus 4 times warned, and he said, you better watch out. Let no man deceive you. And deception, all deception is, and I think I've illustrated that to you here, but when I was in 8th grade at this little junior high in San Jose, California, we had one play on the football field. We got a touchdown every single time. And the reason we did was because it was built on deception. This is what we did. I was the quarterback. I was a lefty, but that doesn't make any difference. But anyway, I'd call the signals, and when I'd say hut 1, my flanker out here on the side, I still remember his name. It was Kevin Duff. Kevin was pretty fast. But when I'd say hut 1, Kevin would start coming back towards me and the middle of the field. When I got to hut 3 and got the ball from the center, Doug Buron, I would get the ball, I would throw it to Kevin, and then the 2 halfbacks and myself, we would come around this end to block for him. Okay? Now we'd run that play 2 times. Identical both times. 3rd down comes, and I got under center, and I said, hut 1! And Kevin started coming back this way. Do you know what the defense did? Immediately. It was as if they looked me in the eyes and they said, I know exactly what you're going to do. And they all headed to this side of the field. I could watch them just starting to shift because they knew that Kevin was going to get the ball. Well, hut 3 comes. The defense has moved. They're all standing right over here. I get the ball, I turn and I throw it to Kevin. We start this way. But this time we did one thing differently. My halfback, his name was Brian Hurley. Brian, as an 8th grader at the track meet, he ran a 100-yard dash in like 10 seconds. Now that normally doesn't happen in junior high, okay? But Brian was fast. He was lightning. Well, Brian took one step this way like he was going to go block, but then he reversed his field and he started going that way. Well, when I had thrown the ball to Kevin, Kevin got the ball, say right here. He put the ball, he started holding it right here on this side of his body. Well, guess what happened? He's coming this way. Brian is going that way, took the ball right off Kevin's hip, and he started heading that way. Folk, the defense was all right there. Kevin, we all plow into him. All of us. I was there, the other running back. We were all here. And the defense, it was flag football. The defense pulls this flag and they go, "We got him!" You know, like that. And we'd look at them and say, "You sure did. You got him all right." And Brian is running down the right sideline for a touchdown. We did that 6 times in the course of the year. Every single time we got a touchdown. Why? Called deception. The defense thought it was all going on here when it was actually going on right over there. And Jesus warned us and said, you better watch out because deception's going to be running rampant at the end of time. Everybody's going to think the problems are right here. And Jesus said they're not going to be there. They're going to be going right over there. And folk, the world today, we're all being told that evil emanates from right here. And it's called Islam. But it doesn't. The enemy of mankind is running down the right sideline going for 6 points. And that's called the papacy. Now, folk, you know, during the Reformation in the 16th century, you had the papacy, you had the Protestants, but Luther, Zwingli, Calvin, they were starting to try to maintain as much connection to Rome as they could. And so they didn't go along with, they went along with Rome on infant baptism. They kind of modified the communion, but not totally. So then there were other people that moved further called the radical reformers. Well, what the papacy did was they said, how are we going to unite all these religious groups together? The papacy, Protestantism, and the radical reformers. How are we going to do it? You know what they did? Islam, the Muslim hordes, started to attack Europe from the eastern side of Europe. And the papacy said, we must all unite together to defeat these infidel Turks, these infidel Muslims. We must unite or our empire will be destroyed. Europe will be no more. Folk, that is exactly what is happening today. Islam is being used as the boogeyman. Islam is being used as the smokescreen, the red herring, the whatever you want to call it. But Islam is getting all the heat. And Rome wants to unite all the religions of the world together to defeat our common enemy. And folk, I was just sent something from Australia, from a gentleman over there who has a ministry. There was a picture right there on the front of his newsletter, in the bottom left corner. They had recently, there was some attack that went on in Australia, and it was blamed on the Muslims. And down in the lower left corner, there were 3 men. And the caption was, uniting together to defeat the enemy. And who were they? There was a Catholic priest, there was an evangelical, and a Seventh-day Adventist. Folk, if we don't listen and heed the prophetic warnings in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, we will go along with it too. Just that simple. You know, folk, you go back and read Great Controversy, there is one time when Islam is referred to. It's on Great Controversy 334 and 335. In fulfillment of the 5th and 6th trumpets. It's the only place it's mentioned, folks. But the last 350 pages of the Great Controversy says nothing about Islam. You want to take Islam, you want to run with that like so many Adventists are today, like so many independent Adventists are today? Well, folk, you're going to have to trample on the Great Controversy to get to Islam. You go to the book of Revelation. Okay, you go to the book of Revelation. From Revelation chapter 1 to Revelation chapter 22, Islam is referred to in one chapter, Revelation chapter 9. One chapter. You've got to trample on the book of Revelation to get to Islam. Folk, it is a smoke screen. It is a diversion to try to unite all religious groups together. That's what it is. Well, recently, there was a massacre in Paris, happened about 1 month ago, at a newspaper place called Charlie Hebdo. You know, there's a lot of people that get involved in studying about current events. Folk, if we study about current events with the only purpose of understanding what went on and who might have been behind the scenes, we've missed it. The only reason we study current events is how does it fit into Bible prophecy? Okay? To study about September 11th and the fact that there were bombs that exploded in the building that actually brought it down, okay, that's interesting. But folk, it was liberty that was destroyed September 11th. So we got to be careful that we don't dig into all the little parts of an event solely to try to understand the conspiratorial aspect of it. It's only important as we understand how does it fit with Bible prophecy. What does it mean? Well, let's go back and review what happened. 1 month ago, January 7, 2015, about 11:30 in the morning, 2 masked gunmen forced their way into the offices of the French satirical weekly newspaper Charlie Hebdo in Paris, France. Now, what's satirical mean? Well, you often hear when you're talking about literature that somebody wrote a satire. Well, what that simply means is they took something and they made it into a joke, thus making people grasp its significance, but in a funny way. That's what a satire is. These two masked gunmen, they killed 12 people, including the editor, this gentleman, Stéphane Charbonnet. 7 other Charlie Hebdo employees and 2 national police officers, and wounded 11 others. Charlie Hebdo had attracted attention for its depictions of Mohammed. See, now here we go again. Islam, Islam, Islam. We're being made drunk on how evil these people are. The gunmen were armed with AK-47 rifles, a shotgun, and an RPG launcher. They fired up to 50 shots with automatic weapons, shouting, Allah Akbar, which is Arabic for God is great. You know, it's interesting. If you go to Egypt, every morning when the sun goes up and every evening when the sun goes down, and when they have their festivals, because it's an Islamic country now, every morning when the sun goes up, whether you want to sleep or not, you're going to hear a loudspeaker all over Cairo, Egypt. And the person will be saying that. I can hear it right now. Allah Akbar. Every morning, every night. But that's what those men shouted. So they obviously were Muslims. Obviously. Killed all these people in the Charlie Hebdo newspaper building in Paris, France. For this, folks, right here. There's a depiction of Muhammad. There's a depiction of Osama bin Laden. That's why they were killed. Right there. Right there. Charlie Hebdo, French for Weekly Charlie. It's a weekly newspaper. It's a satirical weekly newspaper in France that features cartoons, reports, polemics, and jokes. The publication is irreverent, stridently nonconformist in tone. It's strongly secularist, anti-religious, left-wing, publishes articles that mock far-right politics, Catholicism, Islam, Judaism, Israel, politics, culture, various other groups as local and world news unfolds. The magazine was published from 1969 to 1981, then has been again since 1992. The newspaper has a history of attracting controversy and was unsuccessfully sued in 2006 by Islamic organizations for having published they were pictures of Muhammad. The cover of a 2011 issue dubbed Sharia Hebdo, a pun on Islamic Sharia law, depicted a cartoon of the founder of Islam, Muhammad, whose depiction is forbidden in some interpretations of Islam. The newspaper's office at the time in the 20th arrondissement was firebombed and its website was hacked. So that happened a few years ago. Chaos ensued in Paris. Traffic jams, people sitting in traffic for hours. Pictures and comments in this newspaper brought the deaths of several people and the injuries of many more. A group of men united together to create sorrow, bloodshed, and heartache to many people. these extremists, these people were just absolute fanatical, extreme to the core. But they reacted to this silly newspaper, and the result was a living hell. I mean, you got a parent, you have a child that's working in Charlie Hebdo. They go to work that morning. And later on that day, you turn on the local news, whether by radio or by television, and you hear that one of your children or your parent has been killed? For what? For that? That's why they were killed, folks. And what was the response of the world? Now this is very fascinating because, see, it's only when there's chaos that people come together. And it's the famous philosophy of history by George Friedrich Hegel, where Hegel said, if you want something that you want to see put into law, if you want the people to do something, he said, what you do is you create enough chaos and enough bloodshed and enough horror till the people will finally say, we've got to do something. And then they will come out with the exact idea that you wanted them to come up with all along. Now that's called the Hegelian dialectic. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Well, folk, what happened in Paris? Well, there was chaos, there was bloodshed, there was horror. And so what happened? People came together. We're going to unite together to defeat the common enemy. It's exactly what the Jesuits and the papacy wanted. Exactly what they wanted. 2 million people, leaders from over 40 countries around the world, met in Paris for a rally of national unity to honor the 17 victims. In all, 3.7 million people joined demonstrations nationwide in what officials called the largest public rally in France since World War II. The phrase, I am Charlie, came to be a common worldwide sign of solidarity against the attacks. The remaining staff of Charlie Hebdo announced that publication was to continue with plans for a print run of 3 million copies for the next week's issue, rather than its typical 60,000. The survivors' issue of Charlie Hebdo would also be sold outside France. Unity. Everybody coming together. And what are they telling the Islamic world? Well, this is what the rally told them in Paris. We are not afraid. We will come after you. Is a mentality being established? Is a hypnotic plan being put into place? We're going to unite together, and we're not afraid of you. We'll come after you. We'll come after you. Millions across the world responded in grief and heartache. Well, of course you would. You think about the families that were impacted by this horrendous event, people would be grieving for those families over the senseless and ridiculous attacks on the newspaper Charlie Hebdo in Paris. I mean, if somebody was not sorrowful for the people who lost their lives in that newspaper building that day, what kind of a heart would they have to have? They'd have to have the heart of an animal to not feel sorrowful for the senseless destruction of life that took place. Millions were disgusted by these insane acts of cruelty and destruction. Some, though, took this way too far. Some made statements that went far beyond Paris and the attack. I wonder who that somebody might be. And I wonder what they might have said. Well, what do you know? Isn't that interesting how he shows up? The world's peacemaker. What a joke that is, isn't it? A Jesuit with a dagger behind his back, ready to slaughter anybody that opposes his authority. But he's still the world's peacemaker. The man who pretends to be the apostle of peace and wanting goodwill for the world had a response to the massacre in Paris. But Francis, like the murderers, went way too far. His comments are as pathetic as the gunman's bullets. What did Francis say about the massacre in Paris? Well, this is what he said. It was about 5 days after it took place. People are uniting together to face the common enemy. And this is who Francis claimed was the enemy. Pope Francis denounced the religious fundamentalism, did not denounce the murderers. He denounced the religious fundamentalism that inspired the Paris massacres and ongoing Middle East conflicts. So it was religious fundamentalism that's the problem. It's not the crazy, insane fool that took an AK-47 and other weapons and started blowing people away in Charlie Hebdo. That's not the problem, folks. The problem is religious fundamentalism. Saying the attackers were enslaved by deviant forms of religion that used God as a mere ideological pretext to perpetuate mass killing. In his annual foreign policy address to Vatican-based ambassadors, Francis called for a unanimous response. Well, what do you know from the international community to end fundamentalist terrorism in the Middle East? He called for Muslim leaders in particular to condemn extremist interpretations of their faith that seek to justify such violence. Well, what's religious fundamentalism that Francis said was at the heart of the problem in Paris that the international community must unite together to oppose? What is religious fundamentalism? Well, I looked it up in Webster's. Webster says religious fundamentalism is a form of a religion, especially Islam or Protestant Christianity, that upholds belief in the strict literal interpretation of Scripture. It's strict adherence to the basic principles of any subject or discipline. So Charlie Hebdo, and the fundamental problem that Francis sees in our world that caused Charlie Hebdo is people that literally adhere to their beliefs. Now that's the source of Charlie Hebdo. And Francis called on the world to unite together to oppose that. Are you a religious fundamentalist? We better be. If we're not, we don't have any hope. If we're not, we don't have any power. Great Controversy 595 says that God will have religious fundamentalists. God will have a people upon the earth to maintain the Bible, and the Bible only is the standard of all doctrines and the basis of all reforms. The opinions of learned men, the deductions of science, the creeds or decisions of ecclesiastical councils, the voice of the majority, not one nor all of these should be regarded as evidence for or against any point of religious faith. Before accepting any doctrine or precept, we should demand a plain, "Thus saith the Lord," in its support. Now that's a religious fundamentalist who is not going to accept anything but that which they can see in the Bible. Satan is constantly endeavoring to attract attention to man in the place of God. He leads the people to look to bishops, to pastors, to professors as their guides instead of searching the Scriptures to learn their duty for themselves. Then, by controlling the minds of these leaders, he can influence the multitudes according to his will. Francis has put together murderous pigs. That's what they were, folks. You don't go in and kill somebody over a cartoon and still consider yourself to be a human being. You just don't do that. They were murderous pigs. They were fanatical, that would kill at the drop of a hat. And Francis said their problem, the real problem, is they were religiously fundamental. So Francis has joined together now the real source of the problem. It's anybody who consciously obeys and follows their beliefs, whether it's God and His Word or Allah and the Quran. So he's put the groups together now. No one who humbly loves the Word of God would ever be involved in such evil and wickedness. But you remember Francis said that the problem in Paris was not those insane gunmen. It was religious fundamentalism. Well, how far does that go, folks? A Great Controversy says the great deceiver will persuade men that those who serve God are causing these evils. Well, Pope Francis has already started a train where now current events and world events can be blamed on those who fundamentally believe the Bible. And they're the troublemakers. They're the cause of the evils in this world. The class that have provoked the displeasure of heaven will charge all their troubles upon those whose obedience to God's commandments is a perpetual reproof to transgressors. It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced. So what do we have in this statement? Well, we've got problems in the world. We've got chaos that's erupting, evils, murders, horrible events, killings. So some evils are being perpetrated in the world, and then they will be blamed on those who continue to reject the Sunday Sabbath. Those who present the claims of the fourth commandment, thus destroying reverence for Sunday, are troublers of the people, preventing their restoration to divine favor and temporal prosperity. Thus the accusation urged of old against the servant of God will be repeated and upon grounds equally well established. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said, "Art thou he that troubleth Israel?" You're the problem, Elijah. It wasn't the ordaining of women. It wasn't the celebration worship. It wasn't spiritual formation. It wasn't false doctrine, salvation in sin, and a rejection of the Spirit. No, those aren't the things causing the trouble. The trouble was somebody who dared to stand for the principles of God. It was a religious fundamentalist that was the problem in the days of wicked King Ahab. But Elijah didn't apologize, and Elijah didn't agree, and Elijah didn't say, "Oh, excuse me, dear king." Elijah said, "I'm not the one causing the trouble, but you and your father's house, and that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord, and you're following Balaam." So the ordination of women, the rejection of the commandments of God, the delving into spiritual formation, Elijah said, "You are the problem. As the wrath of the people shall be excited by false charges, they will pursue a course toward God's ambassadors, very similar to that which apostate Israel pursued toward Elijah." Elijah was a fugitive. Elijah ran away, had to run away from the law of the land. The law of the land was what the king said. One day soon, the law of the land will be what the Pope says. And God's children will have to become fugitives from the law. Now, Pope Francis blamed the Paris attacks on deviant forms of religion. Well, what does that mean? Well, something that's deviant, usually it's in the context, they use it in the context of sexual behavior. Somebody says, "Oh, he's a deviant," meaning he's got some problems with morals and immorality. Okay, he's deviant. But deviant behavior, deviant forms of religion that Francis talked about, a synonym for deviant is abnormal. It's different. It's irregular. It's not the standard form. It's not conforming to what everybody else says. It's unusual, it's uncommon, it's strange, it's odd, it's peculiar. Can you think of any deviant forms of religion that we have in our world today that Francis spoke out against, that said was the cause of the massacre in Paris? Do you think, folk, do you think that an unusual or strange or odd or peculiar form of religion, how about for a group of people to go to church on Saturday? Is that unusual? Is that uncommon? Is that unstandard? How about, now let's just think about this for a minute. How about people that they don't even eat meat? How about people that drive 30 minutes, an hour and a half to come to church? Are they weird or what? And they pay money? Are you kidding me? Is that weird, folk? Are those people not odd and strange? Yeah, they are. According to Francis, they're real strange. And folk, it's people like that that were coupled in with the shooters at Charlie Hebdo. According to God's spokesman, deviant forms of religion caused the Paris massacre. Deviant means someone who departs from the standard or norm in religious belief. And again, the norm in religious belief today is Sunday. Are you a deviant? We're all deviant, folks, according to Francis. According to the Lord, we're His children, His jewels. His jewels. The norm is the immortality of the soul. Are you a deviant? For simply believing what the Word of God says, Francis has declared it's that mentality that caused Paris. And then Francis issued a warning. Issued a warning. What was his warning? Well, he held up his fist in a conference. This was one of his aides. And he said, what if so-and-so says something against my mother? What would I do to him? And Francis said, I would punch him in the nose. Giving an example of what he meant, the pontiff referred to his friend and Vatican official Alberto Gasbari. That's Alberto Gasbari, who was standing next to him. Gasbari often organizes trips for the Pope. If my good friend, Dr. Gasbari, says a curse word against my mother, he can expect a punch in the nose. You get what his point is, folks? He then aimed his fist at Gasbari and threw a pretend punch, as many of the attending journalists laughed. It's normal, he said of his reaction. You cannot provoke. You cannot insult the faith of others. What did he say? Now, folk, he backtracked. He stated that he did not want to come off as condoning religious violence, but that's exactly what he did. And he made it very clear, You cannot make fun of the faith of others. You cannot insult the faith of others. And if you do, you can expect a punch. If we're going to give the first, second, and third angel's message, what can we expect, folk, from Jesuit Pope Francis? What can we expect? We can expect a punch. You're going to be a religious fundamentalist? You can expect a punch. To kill in the name of God is an aberration, he said. So now Francis talks out of both sides of his mouth. On the one hand, he says, you don't insult somebody without expecting to be socked in the nose. But then he said, but to kill in the name of God is an aberration. An aberration is a mistake. It's wrong. It's an error. So now he's talking out of both sides of his mouth, folks. He went on to say that those who do make fun of the religious faith of others should expect some kind of retribution. He referred to this retribution as normal. They are provocateurs, and what happens to them is what would happen to Dr. Gaspari if he says a curse word against my mother. There is a limit. Francis did not make clear the nature of his logic regarding these two rather conflicting statements. Regarding freedom of speech and religious retribution against any speech which offends. He did mention that liberty came with an obligation for the common good and to respect human dignity, but where he thought the line should be drawn exactly between the two was not specified. Pope Francis made it very clear as a Jesuit exactly what he is telling the world. If you offend my religion, you can expect a punch. Faithful Seventh-day Adventists, religious fundamentalists, deviants from the various forms of religion, were associated with the killers in Paris. Second Timothy chapter 3, verse 12. The Apostle Paul said, yes, all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution. In Matthew 5:10-12, Jesus said, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely, for my sake. Rejoice, and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. I just pray, folks, to be found worthy, to suffer on behalf of the one who has suffered far above and beyond anything that we can ever imagine. And I pray for this mindset that rejoices when people hurt you for the sake of Jesus Christ.